Okay, you never know. All right. Hello, Facebook. My name is Camille. We're so grateful to have you today here with us for our Emerging Through Grief community gathering. I wanted to just quickly go over who we are here at Fourth Trimester Arizona. We are a support for the mental, physical, and emotional health of new parents in the first 5 years after a child is born. We are on a continual mission to best serve new parents across Arizona. And we invite you, if you are here on Zoom with us, to enter your zip code into the chat so that we might be able to use that information for grant purposes. If you're watching on Facebook Live, no need to put your zip code in, but we're so grateful that you're here today. While we're here on Zoom and on Facebook Live, we have a code of conduct that we'd like our viewers to be aware of. We need to remember to be kind and courteous to others who are on our call today. No hate speech or bullying, no promotion or spam, please. And please respect everyone's privacy. And just a reminder to not give any medical advice during this gathering. If you have any questions about anything that we're doing, you want to know how that applies to medical purposes, please talk to your doctor about that. They're the best ones to answer those questions. So today we're so grateful to have Emily with us for our grief gathering. This is our community grief gathering. And during this gathering, we're going to learn tools to support those in our lives who are experiencing grief. This is part 1 of a 4-part series, and we'll share those dates at the end of our program. So first, I would like to introduce Emily. She's a marriage and family therapist and clinical intern. I have known her for over 30 years through various we used to do dance together. We did church activities together. She's a fabulous woman, and I'm so grateful that she's here today sharing her expertise with us. So after seeking healing and training related to her own personal losses and traumas, she started supporting clients in 2011. She facilitated grief groups and served those experiencing miscarriage, infant, or child loss. Through this work, she's discovered her dedication to holding space for couples and families in complex transitions. She's currently finishing her clinical internship for a master's degree in marriage and family therapy with an emphasis in trauma. She meets clients where they are, and Emily helps them discover more about themselves by providing space for exploration and inquiry. She appreciates the formal education she's received, but many of her most important lessons have come through navigating her own personal work and witnessing others process theirs. Those experiences continue to teach Emily the importance of being present for clients, for not only as a clinician, but also as a fellow life traveler. It is an honor for her, and she honors the innate wisdom of the human body and spirit, and keenly feels the privilege that it is to hold such space. In her free time, she enjoys road trips, renovating historic homes, thrift shopping, and a lot more. She recently took up painting. When she is not doing these things, you can find her hosting the podcast Transforming Trauma for the NARM Training Institute. She interviews and learns from experts in the field of mental health. She lives in Mesa, Arizona with her husband, Nick, and her darling 3 living sons. Emily, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but we're so grateful to have you here today, and go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much, Camille, and for your kind words. And it's been fun that we have such history, right? That we have like 30. When you said that, I was like, it has been 30 plus years. It's wild to me. So
I know, I thought about it this morning and was like, how long have I known her? Oh my goodness.
Like forever.
Over
It feels
30
like
years.
our whole lives. It feels like awesome. Well, thank you for that and your kind words. And it is such a privilege to be here in community with all of you. And I know this recording, we were talking about it earlier, the recording will live on. So those of you in the future, speaking to those in the future, we're glad that that you're here with us too. So let's see. So I can just share my screen now, right? Go to see. Oh, good. It let me share this time. Okay. Okay. Can you see that? Okay, cool. And I don't know if I want to, I like being able to like I keep in the Zoom, I see like the faces in the Zoom. And if I do it in slideshow, I can't see all of you. So is it okay if I just keep it? Is this big enough for everyone to see? Okay, so yeah, today we're talking about emerging through grief. And I loved, Camille actually came up with the name, and I love this image of like emerging, moving through it and emerging through grief. And I intentionally wanted to use the word through grief and not from grief, because I really feel like grief is the medicine. Grief is actually how we move through. And a lot of folks think, oh, I need to get over my grief, or I need to, move past it. And really, I just see it as it's a process, and we're moving through. Grief is actually how we do that. So rather than pathologizing the process, I just like, it's a normal human experience, right? For all of us to experience grief when we have loss. So I just want to honor the land that I am on right now. I'm currently on the ancestral land of the Hohokam people. I'm here in Mesa, Arizona. And I also always want to acknowledge the immense amount of privilege that I have, and that buffers me a great deal from some aspects of grief. And I like to say that because there may be many, some joining us that have they may be in a more marginalized population than I am. And so I just want to make sure it's really clear that if you find that my words or anything that I say contradicts what your lived experience is, I really want to always encourage you to trust your lived experience first and foremost, because there are parts of my life that I can't, I haven't experienced the same things. And so if you hold identities that are more marginalized than my own, really trust your lived experience. And then also just to kind of highlight some of the resources that I've used to create this presentation, some of the books. So Ian Anderson, there's a continuing education program online through the University of Toronto, Canada. I use some of the things that he has in that program. Also, the handbook for companioning the mourner, The Body Keeps the Score, The Grieving Brain. These are all resources and Atlas of the Heart, Brené Brown. These are all resources that I've used as I've prepared this presentation. And then also, because we're talking about such a tender topic, especially if it's really fresh for you, if you've recently lost someone, just be sure to take good care of yourself. If you need to take a screen break, or take some time for yourself, get some water, and of course you can go off camera. These are all ways that we can take care of ourselves, so that as we're talking about these tender topics, we don't feel overwhelmed. So in the work that I do, I often offer self-reflective exercises. So I thought we could take a moment here to do the same. And so I'm going to invite you to take a few moments to reflect on a few questions. So if we can kind of just arrive, I'm noticing like the energy. I'm excited about this presentation, and I want to just ground in a little bit right now. So I'm going to slow it down. So asking ourselves this first question, what do you hope that you can experience for yourself during our time together today? So when you saw the email come in, or you saw the Facebook post or the Instagram post that we're, offering this emerging through grief community gathering, what was it that sparked your connection to that? What felt important for you? Is there something that you wanted to experience for yourself as you came here together and are learning more about yourself and more about your relationship to grief? And of course, that can be from a personal, perspective. There's something personal that you're wanting to connect to or experience. Or maybe it's professional. So if you're, a health professional of some kind in the field, maybe there's something that you're hoping to experience today. So just thinking about your answer and then tracking your internal experience. So what's that like for you? Is there something internally? Is there a physical sensation, or is there an emotional, emotion that's coming up? Just noticing that and kind of tracking that. And these are actually a few questions that we talked about I keep wanting to call it the summit, Camille, but what was it? Was it the summit? What was the name of it? I can't even remember.
It was our conference.
The conference. Okay, thank you. I'm like, it's not the summit.
Our summit's coming up.
The summit's coming up. That's a little like commercial right there. The summit's coming up. But the conference, when we had the conference, these were some of the poll questions. And so it was interesting to see actually a lot of the folks that responded, some of the answers. So this question of, do you believe there's a healthy timeline to grief? And it was about half and half. There were some that thought there is a quote, healthy timeline, and some that didn't. So just, I'm not going to say if there's a right or a wrong to that, but just considering for yourself, do you feel that for yourself, there's a healthy timeline to your grief? And then if you've, had an experience with grief, thinking about if you engaged with any grief rituals at the time of your loss. This is something that in a lot of cultures across the world is, it's just expected. There's rituals, there's ways that people, navigate grief, things that people do that help support that grief experience, the mourning experience. And generally in our culture, we've lost a lot of that, unless you're connected with, indigenous cultures that honor loss in certain specific ways. But in general, and in this part of the world, we've lost a lot of these rituals, grief rituals. So just thinking about if you engaged with anything, or did you feel drawn to anything? And I'll talk about my own experience a little bit, but that's something that I noticed there was a void for myself in my first real kind of loss grief experience in life. I felt like there was an emptiness, there was something missing. And so I kind of went searching and, borrowed from other cultures and kind of ancient wisdom that is available, and felt really, grateful to have those resources because they really did help me. So thinking back to if you, had that support, or if you engaged with any grief rituals. And then considering if you're aware of adequate resources that can help, families or yourself or, loved ones as they've lost. Are you aware of resources that can support in the grief process? And if not, thinking about, okay, how can we build that toolbox, so to speak? And then related to that, what have you found helpful and supportive in your own grief journey? So these are just some things to consider for yourself, as we have this conversation and on. So my first, experience that sort of woke me up to the grief process was a loss of my twin sons in 2008. And we're coming up on an anniversary for me, the end of the month, and next month. But their loss for me was pretty intense, and that was the moment where I realized I was really ill-equipped to deal with the experience, and I hadn't had grieving or mourning really modeled for me in any way. There had been some losses in my family, but it had been really like everyone kind of dealt with that behind closed doors. It wasn't something that was talked about, or I don't know that it was explicitly communicated that it wasn't okay to talk about loss or sad feelings, but there was this general kind of silver lining of the experience, like, oh, they're in a better place. Oh, such and such is gonna be better. They're not in pain, or like all of these kinds of ways of sort of bypassing the deeper feelings that come up when we have loss. And when I say loss, it may be a death, it might be a divorce, it might be a job, a career shift, it might be the loss of a pet, there's so many different ways that grief shows up in our lives, right? So for me, this was my first kind of experience of realizing I don't know how to grieve. I don't know how to do this, because I just had kind of all these messages, cultural messages of death, and not that it's a bad thing to believe that there's something, something beyond this life, or that my children were in a better place. Like, it's not that that's a bad thing inherently to believe, but when that sort of pushes down the deeper emotions of grief, that's when it can be problematic, right? So it's not that having those beliefs is necessarily bad, but when we kind of tell ourselves it's not okay to feel sad, or it's not okay to grieve, that's when it's problematic and can cause complicated grief, which we'll talk about. So one of the questions that I found, in my experience come up, it was almost like, I don't know how to describe it. There was a couple moments that feel really poignant to me, or like really stick out in my mind. But there was this moment where I remember I had kind of just collapsed in a room. It was probably a few days after they had passed away. And it was like I vocalized, I was vocalizing, I was crying, but I didn't know, I heard the sound and I didn't realize it was me that was crying until like I had been crying. And I was like, oh my gosh, that sound is me. That kind of wailing is me. And in that moment, this question kind of came up, like, can I ever emerge from this? Like, can I ever how does my life go on? Everything else in the world kind of just seemed to keep going. But like for me, life was standing still. It was completely frozen for me. And I was just stuck in this moment. And so that was kind of this question that I just was holding for a few years, honestly. Can I ever emerge from this? And this is a picture of a well, I think. I don't know, I found it online. It looks like it's a well, like an old well. And to me, that's what it felt like. I had fallen down this deep, dark hole and there was no way to get out. I just didn't see an end to how I was feeling. And so what I kind of proposed, and again, this is not me, I don't want to force this idea on anyone, but just hold it and see if it fits for you, or if it feels like it could possibly be true as you're navigating your grief, to kind of be curious about it, that we can be curious about our experience in grief. And instead of like this deep, dark hole, maybe it's a tunnel. And maybe there's a way through, maybe it's dark, but maybe there is another side to it. We may not feel the light right now because it might twist and turn, right? So we may not see the light, but maybe it's a tunnel. So this idea of maybe there is something on the other side of it, I think creates more space for us to, to make our way through, to hold possibility that we can emerge from this. And again, that's not as a way of bypassing. We don't want to bypass the fact that we're in a tunnel, that it is dark, that it feels really hard and heavy. It's not to bypass that, because that exists and that is real. But to hold this idea that we can at some point emerge from this. This is one of my favorite quotes. It's by Dr. Larry Heller. And I read this quote the first time, I don't know how long ago, probably 4 years ago. And it just felt so true. So it feels true, not only just in a general human experience, but in relation to grief. And so I'll read it to you because I just love this quote. The spontaneous movement in all of us is toward connection, health, and aliveness. No matter how withdrawn and isolated we have become, on the deepest level, just as a plant spontaneously moves towards sunlight, there is in each of us an impulse toward connection and healing. And so for me, that feels so true in the context of grief, because that was my experience. There were some really dark years, some really heavy years, and I didn't know if I would ever emerge. I'm sure plenty of people around me wondered if I would ever emerge as well. That's hard for loved ones to see us in that space. It's hard for them to not want to fix it or to solve it, which again can feel really hard as the griever, to feel like we're a problem, or the way that we're navigating is a problem. To kind of feel pathologized, but I really trust, and as I work with clients over and over and over, what I've seen is that when we have support, that we find a way. There's this natural impulse that we have when we are in connection with someone else, when someone can sit there with us in our grief. It doesn't last forever. That connection is the medicine. Feeling our feelings is the medicine, right? So we can try to push it down, but that's just going to keep popping up. I use this image of like a beach ball. Like if you're in the pool and you keep trying to push a beach ball down under the water, it's just going to pop up and hit you in the face, right? It might really annoy you that it's right in front of your face, but if you can just sit there and like be with it, eventually it will kind of drift off, right? But if we keep trying to push it down under the water, it's just going to keep coming up. And that's, to me, that feels like my grief experience. So when I was trying to push it down because I felt like, oh, this isn't okay to feel, or I'm being too negative, the people around me aren't ready for me to feel this way, it just kept popping back up at me. And it was pretty forceful. It was like I'd push it down really hard and then it would just slap me in the face, right? So if we can learn to just be with it and be with someone else who can be with us in that, right? So we can just be together, that this natural impulse toward healing is really what arises when we have that connection, when we can be with others. It's so, it's like medicine. And that's why, people often think and feel that they have to do something or say something. And so many times, if you've been a griever, you probably know so many times we just need someone there with us. We don't even need them to say anything. We don't need them to do anything. Although sometimes we'll talk about some things that they can do to support us, some very practical things that can be helpful to kind of relieve some pressure from the griever, but we can't fix their grief, nor would we want to, because again, that pathologizes, that makes them feel that what they're feeling isn't normal or healthy. And actually the grief is healthy. If you can think of disconnecting yourself from the emotion, that's not healthy to like disconnect ourselves from emotion. So we'll talk more about that. So some of the guiding principles that I hold when I, think about grief, when I have experienced my own grief processes, as I sit with clients and support theirs. Again, there's this principle of humans have an impulse toward connection and healing. That's innate, that we are just kind of wired that way. The neuroscience shows us this. We can really track this, how the brain lights up when we're with someone else, our nervous systems, our hearts even kind of come in sync. So it's like a very real physical experience. It's not just like warm, fuzzy feelings. It's actually like our bodies actually have this impulse toward connection. This is, as a side note, it's really fascinating. You probably have heard of like the heart actually has like this electromagnetic field. So if you're sitting close to someone, your heart has this field, and we can actually feel in our hearts what other hearts within a certain parameter are feeling. And so there's like science behind this idea of love and connection. It's very real. We can track it. It's measurable actually, which is fascinating to me, and just supports what I feel is really true, that when we can just be with someone in their grief, it's like we're connecting on a deeper level than just I'm sitting here in the room. It's like we are kind of co-regulating. I'm here for you. I'm helping support your even a physical experience, right? Another principle that I hold is that we exist as humans to experience the full range of emotion, and that happy is not the goal. And this is something that, as I continue on in parenting, this is something I'm learning and that my children are teaching me. Happy is not the goal. It's not. It's when that is the goal, we're cutting off so much of the human experience that's really healthy. And it can actually be really unhealthy for us to expect of ourselves or of others to always be happy. When we're shutting ourselves off of those emotions, it's actually really unhealthy for our psyche, for our hearts, for our souls. And that, again, that's the science backs that up. That's not just, me just saying that. The research shows that that's true. Another principle, connection to self, loved ones, and life is where we aim. So again, it's this idea of like we're going to sit in connection with our loved ones as they grieve, as we grieve. And again, there's no good or bad emotions. They just are. Emotions just exist. So today, the objectives that I'm holding, and we can again at the end we'll have a little bit more space. So there's other things that I'm sure will come out of this time that we have together. But first, to just connect with each other. Those of you who are with us here on Zoom, I can like see your names and your faces, and so I'm just feeling I'm just kind of my heart feels really open and so grateful that there's others in the world who are willing to talk about grief. It can be a hard and heavy topic, and it's one that culturally here in the West we often avoid. So whenever I'm in spaces like this with folks who are willing and open to learn and to talk about grief, I just feel so much gratitude in my heart. I just want to name that. The second objective that I'm hoping to have is that we can talk, do some psychoeducation. We can learn about grief and bereavement and how we, as individuals can emerge on the other side of it. And then third, talking about how we can help others in their grief experience as well. So those are a few of the things that I'm hoping that we'll experience today together. So this is sort of a little preview. We'll talk a little bit more about it later. We'll actually do an exercise where we kind of experience the ring theory. But the ring theory in general, it was, let me see, I can't remember her name. Her name is Susan Silk. She's a clinical psychologist, and she came up with this sort of psychological rule to help people know who to turn to, in an emotional time or when they're going through grief. And again, grief doesn't have to just be a death. There's all kinds of losses that we experience in our lives, divorces, diagnosis, if you receive a diagnosis, Loss of a pet, loss of a career, or a job. There's so many, our physical health. Many of us at some point in our lives, especially if we grow to be very old, will experience some kind of disability. So all of these things can bring about feelings of grief. And so Dr. Susan Silk, she has this rule called the ring theory. And the idea is basically, again, we'll just quickly say this and then we'll explore it more a little bit later, is that when there's a loss of some kind or an affliction, we dump comfort into the center of the circle and we dump out the heavy feelings that we feel. So for instance, the person here in the middle, this dot, we can say that's the griever, right? So someone who's lost someone. So for my own personal experience, that was like me when I lost my babies. So this is the griever in the center. Now there's like the significant other and the families that are in this first circle around us, and they can be there to support us, and they may also have grief. So for instance, my parents or my siblings, they felt lost too at the loss of these children, but they were not to kind of grieve into the circle. They grieve out to maybe their friends or their significant others, and then maybe out to colleagues or, someone else. So this ring theory, we'll go through it here in a minute. But you want to, inside, we're just bringing comfort into the center of the circle and we're grieving outward. So that the person here in the center of the circle is not the recipient of others' grief, because that's too much. That's too overwhelming. So we'll talk more about that later and we'll kind of walk through that exercise. So some loss terminology, there's grief, which is actually the normal psychological, social, and somatic responses that we have to loss. So grief is a very physical experience. People, I remember one thing I really experienced was my whole body ached. I wondered if I suddenly had like an autoimmune disease and people can actually develop autoimmune disease after extremely stressful times in their lives or trauma. But it was like immediate. It was like suddenly my whole body ached. Everything hurt. I mean, it literally would hurt to just touch me. And it was like my whole body was experiencing this grief. It was an actual physical response. And it's kind of wild to experience it. And maybe you have, but just know that that's a really normal part of grieving. Mourning is the cultural response to the grief. So again, I feel that here in the West, we've really lost a lot of these ancient traditions, these old wisdom traditions that really help support grieving. And if any of you have read The Body Keeps the Score, the grief and the loss and the trauma can actually live inside of our bodies in a very physical way. And so mourning in old traditions and other cultures, dance, you think of like the Native American peoples, that there's dancing, there's specific dances that they would learn to do after they had lost someone. And there's actually a really practical reason for this. That's because it what's the word? I just wanted to say dispel, that's not the word. It discharges what's inside of the body. So it doesn't have to live inside the body. It gives action to what we are feeling inside. It's an external way of expressing something that we feel inside. And it can kind of discharge that energy in a way. And again, it's a very real, we can track this, through tests and research that's been done. We can actually see that it does create like a physical change, not only in the body, but in the brain. So mourning are these cultural responses to grief. And because here in the West, we've lost so much of that, we think of the West as a melting pot, right? But the sad part of that is that we've learned some of these beautiful specific traditions that all over the world have been so supportive of the grief process. We've lost that. And so connecting to that, kind of doing some of my own genealogy and learning where my people are from, where I'm from, and some of those traditions has been really supportive of my grief process. It's really beautiful actually to do the mourning work. That's part of the grief process, is the mourning. And then so grief work is really the work that's dealing with grief. This might be, if you see a talk therapist or, a therapist of any kind, a somatic therapist. And so that requires, it's kind of a physical and emotional energy, and we're actually reorganizing the experience that we have internally. So that's the grief work. And the grief work in the morning can kind of overlap. they're kind of, I want to say that they're very similar. They're not all the same. There's some differences, but they can kind of overlap. They support each other. I'll say that, mourning and grief work. So uncomplicated, integrated grief. Again, this is just the normal human response to losing someone. It's what you feel. It's not a pathological situation. We never want to like pathologize someone who is grieving, because the fact that they're sad and they're grieving is normal. It would be abnormal if you lost someone close to you and you weren't sad, and if you weren't grieving, right? So this is kind of uncomplicated grief. It does need to be witnessed and honored. Some people really find benefit with a grief therapist or a coach or someone. And again, the research really shows that this is most effective and supportive when it's very hands-off and not directive. So if you're going to someone and they're kind of telling you, oh, this is how you grieve, that you can just check in with yourself. Is that helpful? I don't know. It might, you might feel it is, but a lot of people have said that that's not when it's most supportive. What's most supportive is someone who creates space for you to explore what your grief process needs to be, because it can be really different for everyone. So there's no really prescription like, oh, you do this and then you do this and then you do this, because that sort of prescription might work for one person and it may not be helpful or useful to another person, which is another reason why when someone's grieving, we have this impulse to want to fix or to share or say, oh, this is what you should do. But that may not work for them, right? So just creating space for them to explore their own process has been what has been, the research shows is usually most beneficial. I really liked this image, this idea that people think that grief gets smaller, right? Like it's going to get smaller with time, and before you know it, you'll be fine. You'll be getting up in the morning, and really, what it is that we grow bigger around it. The grief doesn't necessarily get smaller; it changes, and in many ways, we might find it's easier to navigate because we get better at carrying it. But it doesn't necessarily get smaller for most of us. I don't know. Some people may describe that as different, but I really like this image. It really fit for me. But if that doesn't feel true to you, you can have your own experience about it. So again, like I said in the beginning, we're not recovering from grief. We're recovering through grief and mourning. Grief is the medicine. This process of feeling our feelings is part of how we integrate our loss. And, I can say for my other children, especially my oldest son, who was really young when I lost my twins, he has a special sort of empathy for people who have lost. And in witnessing him as I went through my own experience, I think it's because he was kind of swimming in that his first few years of life. So he has a really special heart for recognizing when someone else is hurting, when someone else is in pain or grieving. He just tends to want to support and just be with them. He's really good at that. And so I'll just say there is not to silver line grief, but I can say there are things that we can learn from the grief process, so we can expand our capacity to be with others' pain when we have experienced our own grief and our own, grief process. It's really, honestly, if we haven't done our own grief work, it's really hard for us to show up for someone else in theirs. If it's too scary for us to even look at our own grief, how are we going to be able to show up for someone else in theirs? We're going to have the impulse to fix and make it better. If it's too painful for us to deal with our own, it's just harder to show up. So that's kind of when people ask me, what can I do for them? What can I do for this person that I love? A lot of times I say, have you done your own grief work? Do you know what it's like to sit in that, to be with the feelings of loss, of, losing hope, of the void that you feel when you've lost someone or lost a job or lost whatever? If you can sit with your own, then you're more likely to be able to sit with someone else's. If you haven't been able to sit with your own, you might not be the person to show up for them. Or there's some things that you can do, right? You can maybe send them what's the dinners where you can like have dinner delivered. What is that called? Camille, help me out.
Like on Uber?
Yeah, like
Uber
Uber
Eats,
Eats. Yeah. Thank you. I couldn't think of it. My brain was like, I
or like
put
set
it
up
on
a
the
meal
slide.
train.
Yeah, like a meal train or like Uber Eats, or like there's ways that we can show up for people, but you might not be the right person to sit with them if you haven't had the capacity or you haven't done your own grief work. You might have the impulse to fix. So again, today, I'm sort of just trying to create space for us all to consider what your experience has been. because as we've engaged with our own grief process, it's going to teach us things about how to show up for other people. I love this quote by Gabor Mate. He's, if you've heard of him, he's a medical doctor who really has done a lot of great work in the field of trauma. And I really like what he says here. He says, trauma in some ways is a resistance to grief. Genuine grieving is the opposite of trauma. So when we're able to really be with our grief and experience it, then we're not traumatized at the end of it. We can process kind of in real time what's coming up for us. And rather than stuffing it down and then creating problems for ourselves, like emotional, complex grief, what I was saying earlier, complex grief, that if we can process it in real time and be with it, then we end up not being traumatized. There's lots of stories of people losing close loved ones to them in seemingly traumatic ways, like really you hear the story and you'd be like, oh, that must be so traumatizing. But when they have the support in the moment and real time, they feel they can process that as it's happening, or in the close time period, it doesn't get so complicated and traumatic. In fact, it's amazing to hear some of these stories where you think, whoa, that blows my mind that they went through that, like plane crashes or like really seeming like traumatic situations. But because their nervous systems and their, emotional life wasn't overwhelmed by the situation, because they had proper support, they were able to process it. And then it's not traumatic. It's really amazing. The human spirit is so resilient when we're in an environment that is supportive. And I love this quote by Megan Devine. Grief lasts as long as love lasts. So sometimes we'll have I'll have a client that says, well, when is this over? When can I be done with this? When am I going to feel better? And I just have to say, as long as you love this person, or, whatever it is that you lost, if it's a person or, an experience or a career or whatever, as long as you love that, you're going to still feel the grief. And that's not a bad thing. That means you're human. That means that you have the full spectrum of emotion. So this is all just really quickly, this is the complicated traumatic grief that I was talking about. So when we don't have the proper support, this is what happens. This is where trauma comes up when we haven't had the proper support to grieve. The signals that someone needs additional support, that they are not getting what they need, is when they're completely absent from their grief. So like, for instance, if someone loses a spouse or someone close to them, and they're like, oh, I'm fine. Nope, I'm going to move on. It's okay. You can pretty much figure that they need some added support. And in fact, they probably know intuitively that on some level, they don't have enough support to deal with it. So they're kind of shutting their brains off to it because it's overwhelming. They know on some level that if they were to dive into what that means to have lost that person, their nervous systems would be completely overwhelmed by it. Like, it's a really wise way of adapting, right? That we as humans have to kind of shut ourselves off to emotion that is too much, that we don't have the resources. So when you see someone doing that, like, oh, I'm fine, I'm moving on, they're in a better place, and they kind of bypass that, that's when you know they probably need some additional support so that they can let themselves process. So that's when, maybe there's psychiatric disturbances, physical illness. Again, like I said, a lot of people develop autoimmune disease after a traumatic or a experience or a grief that they haven't been supported in. It's really common actually for people to develop autoimmune disease or physical illness. And that's, again, another sign that they need additional support to process what they've been through. And I like this image, grief is cumulative. So we hold all of our earlier unfelt, unprocessed griefs inside of us like a set of nesting Russian dolls. So again, if you can think of, I want to process in real time, give myself some space to feel it. Maybe pause if I can, take some breaks from work. People who lose someone important to them and they go right back to work the next day. That's a way of, not feeling the intense grief that they have. And it's a way of kind of surviving in the moment. But again, if we bypass what's really we're feeling, it's going to come back later. And it's going to be in a more traumatic, complicated way. So if we can process things in more real time, get the support we need to meet with a therapist or someone that can be with us in that, then we're not just, building on top of grief, on top of grief, on top of grief, because that it's like the weight of that can be crushing if we haven't had the space to do that. I'll just kind of breeze through these. There's no one right way of working with grief. It's really about what feels right for the griever. Again, if it's really directive, if you're seeing someone that's like, oh, this is how you grieve, that may or may not fit for you. Maybe it does, but just tuning in with what feels right for you, for the griever, is the most important thing. These are kind of just all the grief models that kind of exist, in the world of therapy. So again, like I said, numbing might be an alternate way of dealing with the distress that comes with loss. And again, when we numb, it's a temporary way of adapting. And it makes so much sense when we know I don't have the resources or I don't have the support to really deal with this. We can just numb out, binge watching shows on Netflix or scrolling Facebook. Or so when we recognize that we're starting to numb, that's just a coping strategy, right? We can take a look at that. It might make sense for someone who doesn't have the support, but if there's support that you can reach out for, that might be another way to connect with yourself around your grief. Yearning and searching for someone or something. So you might, this is something that it's not as heard of, I don't think, but there are people who, there's like different ways, different behaviors of kind of this yearning or searching, like searching the internet for a cure or, for maybe a diagnosis, and not that that's a bad thing to be looking for, physical support, but I think you probably know what I'm saying. Like there's this way of interacting with the grief experience rather than like acceptance. We're kind of yearning and searching for something to be different. The disorganization and despair as the reality hits that someone is no longer living. Again, it can be not only like an internal disorganization where we're not really sure what we're feeling, but a literal disorganization of the environment. You might see people they don't have the resources to kind of engage with life and do things like, clean their home or, tidy up their space. It just feels like it's outside the realm of their resources. And so you'll see like this disorganization. So again, these are kind of things that we can learn to notice if we're looking to show up for loved ones. So if you're seeing someone who they're starting to live in disorganization, just showing up and say, hey, I know this experience is really overwhelming for you. I'd like to help. Can I come over at 7 and help you, tidy up your living room? There's a really poignant moment for me when my babies passed away. It was such a heavy time for me in such a dark place that my laundry had just piled up. Like my husband had gone back to work. He was doing what he could to like support our family and like, what's the word? Like that was kind of how he coped, was he was like trying to fix it. Like, well, okay, if I can make enough money and pay the medical bills and like this is how he could contribute, right, to the experience. But I was not capable of doing my laundry. I don't think I made a meal. Like we had meal trains coming in, but like I couldn't do it. It was too overwhelming. And so this woman came over that I hardly knew. I think she was a friend of a friend. So she lived in the neighborhood and she just showed up and she said, she had some bags and she said, I'm here to take your laundry. And I was in such a place that I gave it almost a complete stranger my laundry. I mean, that just tells you like how hard it was, how the dark place that I was in. And I was so grateful she left with these huge bags of laundry. And I'm feeling a little bit of emotion because I haven't thought about this in a little bit. Whew. And the tears are okay. I'm not upset about having tears. It's just interesting. I haven't thought about this in a while. It's really gratitude that I'm feeling, if I can just be honest with you. I'm still, 15 years later, 14 years later, I'm still feeling the gratitude for this woman that I still don't even really, I don't know her name. I don't even remember really her face. But she showed up, she took my laundry. I mean, loads of laundry because I had a toddler. So you can just imagine. And she brought them back in these baskets, beautifully folded, smelling like heaven. I mean, I just can't even describe it. It was such for me, it was a really like organizing experience to like have someone bring order to my environment. It was like, oh, thank you. there was no deeper way. She showed up, she brought him back, and I just looked at her. I had no words. I just said, you must know. She says, I lost my husband a few years ago. I know what this is like. So when you see someone that's experienced some of this disorganization, find ways not to fix it. You're not going to fix the grief. You're not going to fix the loss. But if you can help support kind of the containment of the intense emotions, helping them create some organization or reorganization in their environment, it's amazing how powerful that can be. Camille, how are we doing on time? I really have no sense of when.
You're doing great. You have about 15-ish minutes.
Okay,
until
great.
we get to the sharing part. Yeah.
Okay, 15 until we get to sharing. Great. So here's what we'll do. If you have you don't have to have paper and pencil. It's kind of nice if you can write it down for yourself. But if you're holding for yourself a grief experience or a traumatic experience, if there's something that you've dealt with recently, maybe it's really fresh, or maybe it's years old. It doesn't really matter what the experience is, but if you can be thinking of a time that you either felt grief or if now you're experiencing grief, so you're going to hold that experience in mind as we kind of go through this, exercise. I guess it's sort of like an exercise, okay? So the first thing you'll do is to write down your own name, because you're the one experiencing it. You also could do this for someone else, I suppose. If there's someone in your life that's really experiencing grief and you don't know how to help them, this could also be a powerful experience or exercise to do, holding them in the frame. So you're going to write down the name of whoever is directly affected by the experience, by the grief, by the loss, right? Trauma. So it might be one person, it might be a couple or a whole family. You're going to write down their name in this center circle here. So they're the aggrieved or the afflicted person, okay? And then you're going to draw that slightly larger ring around it. And you're going to write down the names of whoever is closest to them, whoever is experiencing, from kind of a first person or a second person perspective, I guess, or just outside the event or the grief. So these would probably be, close family, maybe their significant other if it's a single person. They could be the parents or the close friends. And then you're going to draw another ring outside of them. And these might be like friends of friends or acquaintances, like on Facebook, right? So they're kind of one more degree removed from the grief. They might be colleagues, right? People who kind of know of the situation, know the person, but they're not really, really close. And then the last ring is everyone else. So everyone else who kind of observes from a real distance, they probably don't even know. In fact, they wouldn't know the person, because if they did know them, they'd be in one of those earlier rings. But everyone else, so maybe someone who sees it in a shared Facebook post, that kind of thing. So the first part of this exercise is really assessing which of the circles you are in. Where do you belong? Because it's interesting, sometimes we can want to show up for someone, we can want to support, and we don't know, what's the appropriate way to support, right? If we want to show up in some way. Now, I just gave an example of a woman that I literally didn't know. I don't remember her name. I didn't know her face when she showed up at my door. She had bags and she just told me, I'm here to take your laundry. And I heard later, like, that I think she was like a friend of someone that I knew in my neighborhood. And she was sort of in the neighborhood, but not someone that I knew of. So she knew of what had happened. And because she herself had experienced some pretty profound grief in just a few years before, enough distance that she wasn't like, in the depths of it herself, but she could be a support person. She could see a need and she could show up and fulfill the need, right? So she would be, if I had to say, she would almost be probably not like colleagues. She'd be like a friend of a friend. So I think she'd be in this green circle maybe. Like she knew of me, but I had literally just moved to that neighborhood like 2 months before. So people, word spreads fast in a neighborhood. So she probably knew of where I lived and knew who I was because she heard of me, but we weren't like close friends or anything. So showing up and sitting with me, whether that was her comfort level or if that was even mine, I don't know. I don't think I probably would have sat there with a total stranger and like spilled my, everything. And so she probably knew that, but how could she show up for me? Now, someone else might be totally fine sitting with a complete stranger. So that's not to say that that's a wrong thing to do. Like if you feel the impulse, I would say just really, take the temperature of the room, right? Like read how they're feeling. So if they're putting up kind of some physical boundaries of like, I know I don't want you around, take the cue. But gosh, there are some people who they just need somebody and it doesn't matter who it is. And so if you're feeling someone kind of leaning in or needing support and you get the sense that that you could be that for them, show up in whatever way feels right, but always watch the griever, someone going through trauma, whatever, watch them and take their cues. So she showed up because we had never met. She just figured what's something that I appreciated. I appreciated someone showing up and doing my laundry, or, I would have liked, you can always think, okay, what would I have liked? Maybe she didn't have anyone do her laundry, but she would have liked it. So she showed up and offered that to me. So this just kind of shows how much variation there is, how attuned we have to be to the griever if it's someone else, right? How we really just need to watch of like where they are at and honor where they are at. For some people, even their closest friends or their close family, they may feel so shut down that it's too painful to let anyone in. And that's okay. Like if they're not able to sit with you and share, that's okay too. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you can find some way to show up, maybe it's a letter. Like maybe if you recognize someone doesn't have, like they don't have the capacity to sit and talk about it, like it's too scary. But maybe getting a letter or a card of just saying, I don't have the words. There's no way I can fix this, nor would I want to change your grief. Your grief is your love, right? Like that earlier slide. What you feel right now, the grief that's coming out is really just love that you're feeling. I don't have the words, but I just want you to know I'm here. I'm thinking about you. Those kinds of things are really helpful. So figuring out where you are in the circle is a really important key part of this exercise, right? So the rule itself really is you can only complain to the circles that are bigger than your circle. So say you're here in the true friends place. I say complain, but you can don't dump on inward, right? So if you're grieving your own experience and you're a friend, like say it's your best friend who is diagnosed with cancer, don't then talk to your friend's husband and put your grief on him. You show up to support their grief. And then you shed your tears outward to maybe your partner or your dear friends. They're one ring out. Okay. Now, that's not to say that if you're sitting there with your dear friends, they've just gotten a diagnosis or they lost a child or something like that. If they're crying, we're human. We can feel emotion. I might have a tear. You don't want to be a robot. I'm not saying we have to be robots. You can have emotion, but you just don't want to dump on the person that's experiencing it. I'm sure everyone kind of knows what I'm talking about. So we're not dumping on the inside. The rule is that we can shed our tears and our grief with the outer circles, but we offer support and help to those on the ring that are smaller on the inside of the circle, okay? So again, this doesn't mean that the larger rings aren't affected. So if I share with my partner, my husband, my grief, he's probably having his own experience of grief. He might be in the same ring as me, right? That's okay. But we just want to make sure that the help and support goes inside and the grieving and the tears go outside. Trying to see if I missed anything here. I'm just looking at my notes. So yeah, using the ring theory in practice. Okay, so one example is things like, when someone gets that diagnosis or that health issue, or they're suffering in the hospital, we want to support them and, respect their dignity and all of that. We don't want to bombard them with questions, bombard them with visitors. That would be an example of not support and not help. We don't want to bombard the loved ones either with questions. So respecting their privacy, but just saying things like, how can I show up for you? I want to show up for you. I can bring you dinner tonight at 7. Do you have any allergies? Or don't make it obviously they could say no and you would respect that, but don't make it can I do anything for you? Because they're not going to have the bandwidth to tell you. No, I see Camille nodding her head. No, they're not gonna be able to tell you. So, here's one other thing that was really helpful for me. I had an aunt that showed up and she said, Emily, I know there's lots of things that you probably don't even know right now in this moment. If I were to ask you what you needed right now, I have a feeling you probably wouldn't even know. But in the next few days, you're going to come up on situations and you're going to realize, for instance, you need your laundry done. These are things that'll come up and you'll just feel overwhelmed. Making dinner just feels too overwhelming, or making these calls. I have to call these people and it feels too overwhelming. So she said, when you come to those moments, here's a list. She made like a little board or whatever. She says, I want you to write it down in the moment and I want you to put it on your fridge. And every time I come over, I'm going to look at the list and I'm going to do whatever's on the list. And that was magic to me. I would have never thought of that. I don't think I've ever really heard it. There probably have been people that have figured that out, but I've never really heard of anyone else doing that either. But that was so amazing, because then I was in that moment of, I need to make this phone call and I really don't want to. I put it on the board. It was on my fridge and she came over that night and she just did it. She didn't even ask me. It relieved me of the burden of having to answer her of what needed to be done. Because in that moment, as a griever, you probably all of you have here joining us at some point have been a griever or some kind, you've been going through a hard time, and our brains are foggy. We don't have access, right, to the higher level thinking. We're so busy surviving. We're stuck back here in this part of our brain that we're just in survival and we can't think through the problem. Another thing is that there were things that I needed help and support with, but I didn't even know how to write it down or how to process. So I just would write a couple words with a star. And that meant, hey, something needs to be done here, but I don't know how to write it down. Can you sit with me and we'll figure it out together? So that was another thing. So when there was a star next to it, she'd come to me and she'd say, okay, what is this? What is this phone call that you need to make? And I'd be like, I need to call this doctor's office and I just don't know. And she'd walk me through, okay, let's find the envelope with the phone number on it, or, the thing that they mailed out. And we'd find the phone number and then she'd say, okay, tell me what is it that needs to be done? And I'd say, well, we need to call the insurance or whatever. And she'd go, okay, got it. I can take care of that. So these are some practical ways you can show up. Of course, there's the meal trains. Meals are, grievers will typically either lose their appetite completely or food is the way that they're coping. And I'm not going to judge either way. But if you're not eating at all, that's probably really problematic, right? People can really lose their health in those moments. And so providing nourishing food, and of course, taking care of that, any allergies or anything like that, that's really helpful. Getting food. Let's see, Camille, I'm sure I'm missing things, and we'll have some more time for discussion, but is there anything that I'm missing that you can think of? Because I know you're well versed in this too.
My thing is when I look at this ring theory idea, if you feel like you're on the outermost ring, and you don't know how, and you want to help, right? But you want to, so you do something small and it ends up, you'd be surprised, bringing you closer in. So then you leave that outer ring and you get to the next ring. And sometimes it doesn't, right? Because that person's not, ready or not willing to accept more people in those closer circles, right? Or you're not ready. But sometimes you'd be surprised how often it brings you just in a circle, and then in another, and then till you're right in that. And because your grief or your experience is not the same, obviously, but it can bring you together, right? And you can then support inward, and then you end up making good friends and having closer relationships with those people just by starting off small, and you end up working your way in.
Oh, thank you for highlighting that. That is so important and so valuable to understand. Yeah, some of my very closest friendships to this day have been from, basically they were acquaintances, and it was like, it's kind of like Brene Brown uses the marble jar friends, right? It's like every time there's a connection, every time there's some way that they showed up for me, whether it was just an email. I mean, some of these friends I literally hadn't met in person till a few years ago, but we had been friends online because we connected in a Facebook group, right, where we had some similar losses. We connected in a Facebook group, we're friends for years. And I literally, there was one woman that I just met 2 years ago for the first time in person. And it was a random, like she was in town, or no, I was out of state, and I was near a zoo. And I think I posted on Facebook, I was at the zoo, and she's like, I moved there last year. I'm like 15 minutes away. And we ended up meeting at the zoo. And I was like, it blew my mind that she had turned into one of these close friends that I had known online, and we had kind of shown up for each other in different ways, but we hadn't met in person. And I honestly forgot that we had never really met, because it felt like she was such an old friend. But that you highlight such an important piece, that even if we're on the outside and we feel that impulse to connect, it might just be a little marble, one little thing at a time. And it is amazing how those relationships can bring you in closer into the circle, because you have some, understanding, or just some way of showing up with empathy that is so powerful that it brings two people together. And I love that thank you for highlighting that. Was there something else?
I was going to say also, if you're on that outer circle and all you can do is something so small, but you can't emotionally connect even more, that small thing still matters, right? So don't feel like if you can't connect and move your way into getting into those inner circles, that small thing that you do it still matters to that person that's in the middle.
Does. Yes.
It's like that ripple of water, right? Like when you drop a rock into a pool and that ripple effect happens, everything's affected by that, even if it's a small, teeny tiny thing you're doing. If it's like the laundry, if it's a card, if whatever those examples you gave, if you don't have the mental capacity at that time to really dive deep into it, what you're doing still matters.
Yes, that ripple effect, because, and I again, just thank you for the gems, Camille, because it sort of started a little bit upward trajectory for me, because I felt not only did she create some organization, and I'm not kidding you, to this day, when I smell that smell of whatever detergent she used, it takes me right back. I feel loved, I feel supported from smelling laundry detergent, right? It's like one of those little triggers. We call them glimmers. Like triggers has kind of a negative connotation, right? But a glimmer is when something reminds me of that moment when I felt so loved and supported. It takes me right back to that moment. And it set me on a little bit upward trajectory. It didn't change my whole life, but it put me in a little bit better place where I could then show up a little bit more for my toddler, who had kind of been just surviving, right? I mean, it was like I was feeding him and he was like sitting in front of the TV for months, right? And it was like she came and she did that. And the other thing I want to point out, it wasn't right after. It was like, I want to say 6 or 7 weeks after I had lost my twins. And so that's another opportunity to show up. A lot of times right in the beginning days, everyone flocks and supports, right? And it makes sense. Like they just lost the person. They need a lot of support. So it's not that it's bad. But sometimes when I hear of someone who has a loss and I feel like, okay, I want to show up for them, sometimes I'll wait a month. I'll put it on my calendar. I put an alarm in my phone and I say, this is when I'm going to show up, because by then the crowds will probably have left and they'll feel very alone. Like, oh, everyone's back to their life now. I guess I need to move on too, but you're still stuck in this moment, right? You're still feeling the depth of that loss. So that's another, kind of, I don't know, strategy for connection that I have of when someone loses someone, I'll send an initial, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm thinking of you. I'll do that kind of initial connection so they know that I know and I'm thinking of them. And then I show up later when the crowds have left. And because that's what some people did for me. I had that. I had a few beautiful examples of that, and it meant the world to me. Okay, I have a few more minutes. So these are some things we can consider. Again, so grieving is the active way that we incorporate grief into our lives, and we can discover how we're changed by it. Grief can really change us in beautiful ways if we allow it to. Grief is really it's open-ended. It's an open-ended experience, and it can continually transform us as we go through life and we experience further losses. So since that, sort of big major loss for me, I've had other subsequent losses And those have each meant something different for me. And each one kind of has taught me how to show up a little differently in my life. And I'm continually transformed. That's really how I see it, is that I'm continually transforming through my traumas, through my grief. And if we can reach out for for support, we can change in really beautiful ways. And then the third piece is really doing our own grief work is what helps us know how to show up for others. If we can't bear our own grief, it's going to be really hard to show up for others in the presence of their grief. We're going to want to fix, we're going to want to bypass, and that's not really helpful. So really showing, getting in tune with what your own experience was and thinking back to that and doing your own grief work is really powerful. So Camille, am I okay on time? Are we about where we want to open it up?
No,
okay.
We're perfect. So what we're going to go ahead and do at this time, thank you so much for those of you who are joining us on Facebook Live. We're going to go ahead and pop up a Facebook Live so that the participants here in Zoom can feel comfortable to share in a Zoom setting. So thank you again, Facebook Live. And we will have more things happening in the next couple of weeks. I'll show you our last slide really quick here. So our next gathering is on Thursday, October 6th at 10 a.m. for the topic of miscarriage and infant loss. And then we'll have one on December 1st for loss of self and parenthood. On March 2nd, we'll have a special birth worker gathering for how to support mothers and families in grief. And then we'll end the series on June 1st at 10 a.m. with infertility awareness. So thank you again for those who could be there today and on Facebook Live, and have a great day.